There's a country estate in England where a group of mathematicians, linguists, and chess champions changed the course of human history. They shortened World War II by at least 2 years, saved an estimated 14 million lives, and then they went home and never spoke about it. For 3 decades, the world had no idea what happened at Bletchley Park. The official story was simple. Britain won the intelligence war through luck, good espionage, captured documents. The truth was far more extraordinary and far more secret. So secret that people who worked there married colleagues without knowing what their spouse actually did all day. So secret that some took the story to their graves, never telling even their own children. What were they hiding? The answer involves the most sophisticated encryption machine ever created. A mathematical problem considered impossible to solve, and a race against time where every day of failure meant thousands more deaths. But here's what makes it fascinating. The people who solved this impossible problem weren't elite spies or hardened military officers. They were crossword puzzle enthusiasts recruited through newspaper competitions, chess players pulled from university clubs, linguists who happened to speak obscure languages. One of the most important codebreakers was a woman who'd been a debutante just months before the war started. Another was a mathematician who most colleagues thought was insufferably awkward and strange. That mathematician's name was Alan Turing, and his story alone is worth the price of admission. But he's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Let's start with what they were up against, because understanding the problem makes the solution so much more remarkable. The Germans had a machine called Enigma. Looked like a typewriter in a wooden box. Nothing particularly intimidating about it. You'd press a key, a light would illuminate a different letter. That illuminated letter was your encrypted message. Simple enough that any radio operator could use it, but the mathematics behind it were terrifying. Each Enigma machine had 3 rotors, sometimes 4 or 5, depending on the model. Each rotor had 26 positions, 1 for each letter of the alphabet. Every time you pressed a key, the rotors would move, changing the encryption pattern. The number of possible settings was astronomical. We're talking 150 million possible combinations. Let that sink in for a moment. Even if you could test 1 million settings per second, it would take longer than the age of the universe to try them all. And the Germans changed the settings every single day at midnight. Every 24 hours, the impossible problem reset itself and you had to start over. Break today's code or the intelligence becomes worthless. Yesterday's solution tells you nothing about today's messages. This is what made Enigma theoretically unbreakable. This is why the Germans trusted it completely. They sent everything through Enigma. Battle plans, troop movements, U-boat locations, supply routes. The entire German war machine communicated through this device, confident that no one could possibly crack it in time to matter. They were almost right. Britain's first attempts at breaking Enigma were heroic failures. Traditional code-breaking techniques were useless. You couldn't use frequency analysis when the code changed with every letter. You couldn't look for patterns when the patterns themselves were randomized by mechanical rotors. Every conventional approach hit a mathematical wall. But then, someone had a different idea. Instead of trying to break the code through cryptography, what if you built a machine to fight a machine? What if you could automate the process of testing possibilities, eliminating impossible combinations until you found the right one? The problem was that no such machine existed. No one had ever built anything that could perform the kind of logical operations necessary to crack Enigma. This was 1939, remember. Computers didn't exist yet. The technology required to solve this problem hadn't been invented, so they had to invent it. Enter Bletchley Park, a Victorian mansion 50 miles north of London. Before the war, it was a hunting estate. Ugly building, really, a bizarre architectural mess of different styles that didn't quite work together. The kind of place you'd drive past without a second glance. In August 1939, just weeks before war was declared, the first recruits arrived. The government code and cipher school was being relocated from London to this remote location. Officially, it was a precaution against German bombing. Unofficially, they were about to attempt something unprecedented. The first recruits were an odd bunch. Dilly Knox, a classic scholar who'd been breaking code since World War I. Gordon Welchman, a mathematician from Cambridge. And Alan Turing, 27 years old, brilliant and peculiar in equal measure. Turing had a habit of chaining his coffee mug to the radiator so no one would steal it. He rode a bicycle with a broken chain that required him to count the pedal rotations and dismount at a specific point to adjust it. He wore a gas mask while cycling during hay fever season, not because of gas attacks, but because it filtered the pollen. His colleagues thought he was odd. They had no idea he was about to change the world. Turing looked at the Enigma problem differently than everyone else. Most codebreakers were trying to find the daily settings through clever deductions and lucky guesses. Turing realized that approach would never scale. Even if you got lucky once, you'd have to get lucky again tomorrow, and the day after, for the entire war. Instead, he focused on the machine's weaknesses. And Enigma did have weaknesses, if you knew where to look. The rotors could never encrypt a letter as itself. They became anything except A. That seems like a trivial detail, but to a mathematical mind like Turing's, it was an opening. He also realized that German radio operators were creatures of habit. Messages followed predictable patterns. Weather reports started with Wetter, the German word for weather. Many messages ended with Heil Hitler. If you knew certain words appeared in a message, you could use that knowledge to test possible rotor settings. But testing still required speed, inhuman speed, which brought Turing back to the same problem. They needed a machine. The device he designed was called the Bombe, named after an earlier Polish code-breaking machine. But Turing's Bombe was far more sophisticated. It was essentially an electromechanical computer, though that term didn't exist yet. 6.5 feet tall, 7 feet wide, weighed over a ton. Filled with rotating drums that mimicked Enigma rotors, testing thousands of possible settings simultaneously. The first bomb was installed at Bletchley Park in March 1940. It was loud, temperamental, and broke down constantly, but when it worked, it was remarkable. What would take human code breakers weeks could now be done in hours, sometimes minutes. Still not fast enough. The Germans were encrypting thousands of messages daily. One bomb couldn't handle the volume. They needed more, many more. And they needed people to operate them, analyze the results, piece together the intelligence. This is where the story gets really interesting, because Bletchley Park couldn't recruit through normal channels. They couldn't advertise for code breakers when code breaking was supposed to be secret. So they got creative. The Daily Telegraph ran a crossword puzzle competition in January 1942. The challenge was simple. Complete the crossword in under 12 minutes. Winners would be invited to take an aptitude test for unspecified war work. It was a recruitment drive disguised as a newspaper contest. Hundreds of people competed. The winners had no idea they were being evaluated for their pattern recognition and problem-solving skills. Some were invited to a mysterious office in London, given tests involving codes and puzzles, and then offered jobs they couldn't discuss with anyone. One recruit was a teenager named Mavis Beatty. She'd been studying German at university when the war started. Someone noticed her language skills and sent her to Bletchley Park. No interview, no explanation, just show up and don't ask questions. Her first day, they sat her at a desk with encoded messages and said, "Start looking for patterns." That was the training. Figure it out or don't. Mavis figured it out. She became one of the most productive code breakers at Bletchley Park, eventually cracking Italian naval codes that helped win the Battle of Cape Matapan. She was 19 years old. The workforce at Bletchley Park grew rapidly. 50 people in 1939, 500 by 1940, nearly 10,000 by 1945. 3/4 of them were women, mostly young women in their late teens and early 20s. They operated the bombs, analyzed decrypts, translated messages, cross-referenced intelligence. And they did it all in complete secrecy. They couldn't tell friends where they worked, couldn't tell family what they did. Many worked night shifts in cold drafty huts, performing repetitive tasks without knowing why those tasks mattered. The compartmentalization was absolute. You knew your job and nothing else. Joan Clark worked in Hut 8 with Alan Turing, attacking German naval Enigma. She was brilliant at her work, quickly becoming deputy head of her section, but she was paid significantly less than male colleagues doing identical work. When she complained, she was told that giving her equal pay would set a dangerous precedent. This was 1941. Women's contributions were essential but officially undervalued. Joan stayed anyway. The work mattered more than the insult. By mid-1941, Bletchley Park was regularly breaking German Enigma traffic. Not all of it, not always quickly enough, but consistently enough to provide valuable intelligence. Churchill called the intelligence ultra, and he guarded it obsessively. Better to sacrifice advantage in a small battle than risk revealing that Enigma was compromised. This created impossible ethical calculations. Sometimes the Codebreakers would decrypt messages about incoming attacks, convoys that would be ambushed, cities that would be bombed, and intelligence couldn't always act on the information without making the Germans suspicious. How do you know which convoy to save? If you defend them all, the Germans realize their codes are broken and they change everything. Then you're back to zero intelligence. But if you do nothing, people die, people you could have saved. These decisions haunted some of the Bletchley Park staff for the rest of their lives. Being smart enough to read the future, but not always free to change it. That's a special kind of torment. The U-boat war in the Atlantic was the most critical theater for Enigma breaking. German submarines were sinking supply ships faster than Britain could replace them. If the U-boats weren't stopped, Britain would be starved into submission. The entire war hinged on keeping the Atlantic supply lines open. German naval Enigma was the hardest version to crack. More rotors, more complexity, more security procedures. For most of 1941, Bletchley Park struggled with it. They'd have occasional successes, brief windows where they could read U-boat traffic, then the Germans would change something and they'd lose access again. Then they got lucky. HMS Bulldog captured U-110 in May 1941, retrieving an intact Enigma machine and code books before the submarine sank. This gave Bletchley Park the breakthrough they needed. For several months, they could read German naval traffic almost in real time. The impact was immediate. U-boat kills dropped dramatically. Convoys were routed around submarine patrol lines. Ships that would have been sunk made it safely to port. Thousands of lives saved because mathematicians in a country mansion could read messages German commanders thought were secure. But in February 1942, disaster struck. The Germans introduced a new four-rotor Enigma for U-boat communications. Overnight, Bletchley Park went blind. The bombs couldn't handle four rotors. The mathematics were even more impossible. Allied shipping losses immediately spiked. This moment might have lost the war. If Bletchley Park couldn't break the new Enigma, if U-boats continued sinking ships unchecked, Britain's position would become untenable. Everything depended on solving a problem that was objectively harder than the one they'd already struggled to crack. Alan Turing was in America when the four-rotor Enigma appeared, liaising with U.S. cryptography efforts. When he returned and learned about the crisis, he went into overdrive. They needed new bombs, faster ones, capable of handling the additional complexity. The Americans helped build them. Within months, four-rotor bombs were operational. By December 1942, Bletchley Park was breaking U-boat traffic again. The tide in the Atlantic turned. By mid-1943, the U-boats were losing. More submarines were being sunk than ships they destroyed. This was Bletchley Park's greatest contribution to the war. Not any single battle, but the sustained ability to read German communications across multiple years. Every day they stayed ahead of German security measures. More lives were saved. More ships made it through. More supplies reached Britain and later the Soviet Union. D-Day planning relied heavily on ultra-intelligence. The Allies knew where German divisions were positioned, knew that Hitler believed the invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. Knew the deception campaigns were working because they could read German commanders reporting false intelligence as facts. But here's the remarkable part. Through all of this, the Germans never seriously suspected that Enigma was broken. They trusted the mathematics. How could anyone possibly break 150 million combinations every single day? They couldn't imagine that someone had built machines specifically to do exactly that. Machines that didn't exist anywhere else in the world. Machines that were essentially early computers, though that term wouldn't be widely used for another decade. Bletchley Park wasn't just breaking codes. They were inventing modern computing in order to break codes. Turing's theoretical work on computation, his concept of a universal machine that could perform any calculation, was being realized in hardware form through the bombs and later machines called colossi. The Colossus computers, designed by Tommy Flowers, were even more advanced. They attacked a different German cipher called Lorenz, used for the highest level communications between Hitler and his field marshals. Colossus was the world's first programmable electronic digital computer. It was operational in 1943, years before ENIAC, which usually gets credit as the first computer. But nobody knew about Colossus. Because Bletchley Park was secret. Because Ultra was so valuable that Churchill ordered all evidence destroyed after the war. The machines were dismantled. Documents were burned. The people who worked there were told never to speak about it under penalty of prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. So they didn't. For 3 decades, one of the greatest intellectual achievements in human history was hidden. The people who'd shortened the war, who'd saved millions of lives, went back to ordinary life and never told anyone what they'd done. Alan Turing went to work on early computer designs, was prosecuted in 1952 for homosexuality, which was illegal in Britain, underwent chemical castration as an alternative to prison, died in 1954, probably by suicide, age 41. Most of the world had no idea who he was or what he'd accomplished. Joan Clark went back to civilian life, worked as a numismatist, never spoke about Bletchley Park except to say she'd done clerical work during the war. Her family learned the truth only after the Official Secrets Act was partially lifted. Mavis Beatty raised children, became an expert on garden history, would occasionally be interviewed about World War II and deflect all questions about her actual role. "Just filing, really," she'd say. "Nothing interesting." This continued until 1974, when the British government finally acknowledged that Bletchley Park had existed and that Enigma had been broken during the war. Even then, many details remained classified. Full disclosure didn't happen until the 1990s. Why the secrecy? Because Britain continued using modified Enigma machines for communications in former colonies after the war. They'd sold Enigma-based systems to other countries, assuring them the encryption was unbreakable. Those countries had no idea Britain could read every message. The intelligence value of maintaining the secret outweighed the historical recognition, so the people of Bletchley Park remained silent. Some for the rest of their lives. Think about what that means. You've done something extraordinary. Something that objectively made the world better. Saved countless lives, advanced human knowledge, and you can't tell anyone. Not your spouse, not your children, not your closest friends. You watch other people get credit for victories you helped create. You see inaccurate histories published, and you say nothing. That's a different kind of heroism. Not the dramatic kind that makes for good movies, the quiet kind, the frustrating kind, knowing the truth and keeping it to yourself for decades because that's what you promised to do. When the story finally came out, the world was shocked. This explained so many things that hadn't made sense. How had the Allies been so well informed? How had they consistently outmaneuvered German forces? How had they known exactly where to strike? Eisenhower said ultra-intelligence shortened the war by 2 years. Some historians estimate even more. Every month the war continued. Hundreds of thousands died. So if Bletchley Park knocked even 18 months off the war's length, we're talking about millions of lives saved. But it's not just about body count. It's about preventing suffering. Prisoners of war who were liberated sooner. Concentration camp victims who might have survived if discovered earlier. Cities that weren't bombed. Children who grew up with fathers who would have died. The ripple effects are incalculable. And it all traces back to a weird Victorian mansion where crossword enthusiasts and mathematicians fought a war with pencils and early computers. The technology developed at Bletchley Park directly influenced post-war computing. Turing's theoretical work became the foundation for computer science. The practical experience of building and operating the bombs and colossi informed the next generation of computer designers. That smartphone in your pocket, that laptop you work on, the internet infrastructure connecting the world, all of it descends, at least partly, from machines built to break Nazi codes. The lineage is direct and documentable, but for 30 years, that story was hidden. Computer pioneers couldn't acknowledge their wartime work. Historians of computing were missing crucial pieces of the puzzle. The true history of their field was classified. Imagine being Tommy Flowers, watching people credit others with inventions you'd created years earlier. But you can't correct the record. You signed the Official Secrets Act, so you stay silent while history gets written wrong. This happened to dozens of Bletchley Park veterans. They knew the truth. They watched it be misreported, oversimplified, or ignored entirely, and they couldn't do anything about it. When declassification finally happened, many were elderly. Some had died never receiving public recognition. Those who were still alive suddenly found themselves treated as heroes. Books were written. Documentaries were filmed. Schools taught the story. Alan Turing, dead for 2 decades, became a cultural icon. The tragic genius who saved millions and was destroyed by his own country's bigotry. Britain issued a formal apology in 2009. He was granted a royal pardon in 2013. His face now appears on the £50 note. Better late than never? Maybe. But Turing deserved recognition while he was alive. He deserved to know that his contributions mattered, that he mattered. Instead, he died thinking his country had rejected him, likely unaware that his wartime work had saved millions. That's the tragedy at the heart of Bletchley Park's story. The secrecy that made it effective also meant the people who worked there couldn't be properly honored. National security required their sacrifice to be invisible. Was it worth it? That's a complex question. The intelligence value of continued secrecy after the war was real, but the human cost to the people who carried that secret was also real. Some struggled with the burden. Others made peace with it. None had much choice in the matter. Today, Bletchley Park is a museum. You can visit the site, see reconstructed bombs, walk through the huts where history was made. It's become a popular tourist destination. School groups learn about code breaking. Tech companies hold events there, honoring the birthplace of their industry. The story is finally being told, but it's incomplete. We'll never fully know everything that happened there. Some details remain classified. Some knowledge died with the people who held it. The full scope of Bletchley Park's contribution may never be fully understood. What we do know is extraordinary enough. A few thousand people, mostly young, mostly working in unglamorous conditions, changed the outcome of World War II. They solved problems considered mathematically impossible. They invented technologies that didn't exist. They kept secrets for decades because they'd promised to do so. And they did it all while being told their work was routine, unimportant, just filing papers. The women especially were given that message constantly. Your contribution doesn't matter. You're just support staff. The real work is done by the men upstairs. Except it wasn't. The real work was done by everyone there. The bomb operators whose attention to detail caught anomalies, the translators who understood context and idiom, the clerks who maintained indexes that let analysts cross-reference information. Every role mattered. Every person contributed to the final result. That's worth remembering. History loves individual genius narratives, the lone hero who saves the day. But Bletchley Park wasn't one person. It was thousands working together, each doing their small part of an enormous puzzle. Alan Turing was brilliant, absolutely. But his bomb wouldn't have worked without the engineers who built it, the operators who ran it, the analysts who interpreted the results, the intelligence officers who turned decrypts into actionable information, the military commanders who used that information effectively. It was a system, a human system backed by mechanical systems, all working toward a common goal. Break the codes, shorten the war, save lives. And it worked. Against incredible odds, it worked. The mathematically impossible was achieved through human ingenuity, determination, and collaboration. That's the real lesson of Bletchley Park. Not that genius individuals can solve any problem, but that when smart people work together, when they're given resources and support, when they're united by a critical mission, they can achieve things that seem impossible. The Codebreakers at Bletchley Park weren't superheroes. They were ordinary people doing extraordinary work. They made mistakes. They had failures. Some days the codes didn't break. Some intelligence came too late to matter. People still died, but they kept working, day after day, year after year. Through bombing raids and rationing and the constant pressure of knowing that delays cost lives. They kept showing up, kept solving puzzles, kept pushing the boundaries of what was possible. And when it was over, when the war was won and the secret work was done, they went home, back to their lives, carrying the weight of what they knew and couldn't share. For 30 years, the greatest secret of World War II stayed hidden. The people who shortened the war by years, who saved millions of lives, who invented the foundations of modern computing, remained anonymous. Until finally, the world learned what happened at that ugly Victorian mansion in the English countryside. Until finally, the Codebreakers of Bletchley Park received the recognition they'd earned but never sought. Their story reminds us that history is made by people we'll never hear about. That crucial work often happens in obscurity. That sometimes the most important contributions are the ones that remain secret longest. It also reminds us what human beings are capable of when we're at our best. When we set aside ego and work towards something larger than ourselves. When we apply intelligence and creativity to solving problems that matter. The Codebreakers at Bletchley Park saved the world. Then they went home and never told anyone. That's heroism of the highest order. Not seeking glory, just doing what needed to be done. And now, finally, we know. We know what they did. We know what it cost. We know why it mattered. The secret that stayed hidden for 30 years is finally told. The ordinary people who did the extraordinary work are finally honored. And the legacy they created, both in shortened war and advanced technology, continues shaping our world today. That's the story of Bletchley Park. Not just code breaking, not just early computing, but human courage, human ingenuity, and human sacrifice, all working together in service of something greater. They were told what they were doing was impossible. They did it anyway. And the world is immeasurably better because they did.